Well, hello, all you AP1 folks. Just gonna try to get this the endocrine system done, so you guys will have this before the final coming up here. All right. So at least looking at this, we've been doing this all quarter, kind of looking at some key questions here, and then trying to decide how these are kind of important to us. So first thing we're talking about is why do we have an endocrine system, and then secondly, basically how does it work? Uh, when it really comes down to this, we're going to talk a little bit about regulation overall of the endocrine system, how it's controlled, how the different glands interact with one another. It should be a lot of review of at least a number of things we've talked about before, that being negative feedback loops and how something can feedback and regulate on itself again. That's going to be one big piece of this. The other big piece of this for you guys to know for testing and for the future in general is it's going to be a lot of what are the different endocrine organs, and of those endocrine organs, what hormones do they make, and then what is the action of those hormones. That's going to be the big key stuff that we're going to be looking at for any tests or finals on this stuff. All right, so why do we have an endocrine system? Well, endocrine system is very similar to the nervous system in that it is really a command and control system of the body. We've been talking about the nervous system and all of its kind of nerve impulses, electrical impulses, action potentials, how those travel around the body, how it's really quick. But a lot of times those nerve impulses, it's quick, so it gets you to get a muscle to contract or something else like that, and then that's it. Where the endocrine system is a much, at least its effects generally are much longer lasting. Sometimes it's a little bit slower to work, so I mean, this involves releasing a hormone out into the bloodstream, which is the definition of an endocrine gland. It's going to release something into the bloodstream, but then that hormone goes to whatever its target cell is, and then is going to alter somehow the function of what that target cell is doing to bring about some type of change. So this is overall showing all the different endocrine organs of the endocrine system. And unlike most of the systems in the body, this is a group of organs that are grouped together because they all do similar things in that they all release hormones into the bloodstream which are going to act on something. Unlike most other systems in the body, though, we do not have a system of connected organs here like the digestive system or the respiratory system or the urinary system where everything's kind of connected and it goes from this organ to this organ to this organ. These are kind of diverse organs throughout the body that are grouped together based on the fact they have a similar function. So you can see on this one here, it's kind of going through the main organs that we have here. So you have the hypothalamus. We'll see that's kind of the main thing in charge here. I kind of would call that the president. The pituitary gland is going to be another big one here. That's kind of the vice president. And then you have all these other organs that are going to be, for the most part, regulated by that hypothalamus and pituitary gland. There is going to be a few of these that we're not going to worry about for the time being. So at least to kind of give you some of the ones that are on here right now that we're not going to worry about. Don't worry about the heart, the kidney, and the digestive tract for sure on in AP1. We'll be looking at the endocrine actions of these ones a lot more in AP2. Outside of those ones, we're going to take a quick hit at the gonads here, the reproductive organs, but again, we'll do a much greater detail in AP2 as well with the thymus. We'll take a little bit more at the thymus in AP2 where how it's involved with generating specific immune cells in the immune system. All right. So before I really kind of get into all of the actual organs and what they're doing, I just want to do a quick discussion of the two main classes of hormones. And this table breaks it down into four main classes. I'm just going to kind of do the two main ones here. And really, when it comes down to it, we have kind of protein-based hormones, so things that are amino acids or peptides, so groups of amino acids put together, versus lipid-based hormones. The main thing with these is they're completely different structures, and either one of these to have some type of an effect is going to have to somehow interact with the cell. Cell membrane being a phospholipid bilayer, we're going to see that lipid hormones have a tendency of being able to enter into the cell and do things a little bit differently than, say, a peptide hormone would. And I'll kind of show you these real quick. Hormones, again, they're released in the bloodstream, generally are freely circulating. Sometimes they're bound to a transport protein. The main way to think about a hormone is kind of hormones, they're going to be released in the bloodstream that go to a target cell. So how does a cell know if it's a target cell? And the simple answer to this one is it's a lot like a radio broadcast. The only way that you receive the radio broadcast is you're tuned into that station. It's kind of the same thing with target cells and hormones. Those cells that are going to respond have receptors for whatever hormone has been released, and that's how what a target cell is determined, and then what that receptor is linked to is going to determine somewhat what's going to happen with that action of whatever that hormone is going to do. So like I said, different receptors, kind of different places here. So for most of your peptide hormones, it's going to be something like this, and by no means do not worry about learning about each of these separate things here. I'm just showing you these are different things that happen with kind of these peptide-based hormones. Main thing with peptide-based hormones is, excuse me, is that they are made of protein. And proteins, unlike lipids, are going to have a hard time going through a lipid membrane. So I always kind of joke around and say the message that a peptide hormone is going to send is a lot like smuggling something in or out of jail. You need a man on the inside, you need a man on the outside. And this is kind of the case with these peptide-based hormones. You're going to have some type of man on the outside, which is this protein receptor right here that the hormone can bond to. That's the man on the outside. The man on the inside is this protein right here, which is going to receive the signal from this receptor and then do whatever it's going to do on the inside. So like I said, man on the outside, man on the inside, hormone binds to this membrane-bound receptor, which activates some other type of molecule that is going to be on the inside of the cell and can bring about changes in cell function. When we look at these lipid-based hormones, because the membrane is made of lipid, these lipid-based hormones can generally diffuse directly through the membrane into the cytoplasm, and in the case of these ones, there is going to be cytoplasmic receptors that bond to this and then help it get into the nucleus where it can bring about changes in gene activity. So both are altering cell function, just peptide versus lipid do it in slightly different ways. And prostaglandins are, what we're going to see is these are just some really kind of specialized ones that are very locally acting stress type of hormones that, like I said, act very locally, do really well in small quantities, and can alter how other cells respond to hormones. So what we're going to get into next is really how is this regulated and what are the actions of all these different hormones. So at least to start out with, overall regulation of the endocrine system, it's really going to be the hypothalamus that's in charge. And so, and as you can see by the slide, the hypothalamus really has three main mechanisms by which it can regulate what's going on within the endocrine system. And we'll kind of go through 1, 2, 3 like it's shown on the slide here. So the first thing is going to be, like it says here, you can secrete regulatory hormones to activate what's something in the anterior lobe or the front lobe, or a lot of times called the adenohypophysis, the front lobe of the pituitary gland. What we have here is you have a capillary network that's up in the hypothalamus. Hormones get released into this. It goes through the bloodstream down to these cells right here, and these hormones act on the target cells here to trigger the release of different hormones by the pituitary gland. So it's basically endocrine regulation of another endocrine organ. Another way that the pituitary, not the pituitary, but the hypothalamus controls the endocrine system is the second one here. The hypothalamus makes both ADH, which stands for antidiuretic hormone, we'll talk about what that does in a little bit, and oxytocin. And it makes both of those and stores them down here in the posterior lobe of the pituitary. And it can regulate their release by direct nerve impulse down here, triggering the release of ADH or oxytocin. The third and final way that we're going to see that the hypothalamus can actually can control the endocrine system or regulate the endocrine system is that there is sympathetic nerves, so part of that autonomic nervous system, which directly wire down to the adrenal medulla and can trigger the release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, or also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. So those are the three main ways that the hypothalamus is going to control what goes on in the endocrine system. Like I said, it's kind of like the president of the endocrine system. It's in charge. It regulates the other parts, which in turn are going to regulate other organs, as we'll see in just a little bit. So the hypophysis is the pituitary gland. Those kind of are both used interchangeably. And we're going to see the pituitary gland really makes 9 different hormones. We're really going to look at 8 main ones that it makes that are going to be important to us. And what's going to go on here. So this is showing you the pituitary gland. You can see here's the anterior pituitary, the middle pituitary, and then the posterior pituitary. And if you look at an actual slide of these, you can see there is definitely differences in the actual cellular structure or the tissue structure of the different parts of this pituitary, showing that they definitely, because they look different, are probably going to do different things, and we'll see that they actually do. So the anterior lobe, like I said, is going to be regulated by these releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones, which are sent from the hypothalamus to control what goes on here. So they go through a little portal system, which means 2 capillary beds. So there's a capillary bed up the hypothalamus. It's going to release the hormones into there. They go in these little venules down to the pituitary gland, and there's another capillary bed there where they can bind to their target cells and then trigger either the release or stop the release of any particular anterior pituitary hormone. And this is kind of showing that right here. See the capillary bed up here, followed by the capillary bed down here. Hormones released from up here, carried down here, and act on target cells in that anterior pituitary. And how this basically works is there is these releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones for most of these different glands. So if we look at the top of this little thing right here, it's showing you this TRH, that's thyroid releasing hormone. It can get released by the hypothalamus. It's going to act on the anterior pituitary to release a particular hormone. In the case here, it releases something called TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And I'm guessing this is not going to be a big surprise, but it acts on the thyroid. So the thyroid gland right here, this is going to release that hormone 1. It's going to act on this gland, which is going to stimulate the release of thyroid hormones. What we see in most cases here, that thyroid hormone is going to have some effect on the cells downstream. The other thing it's going to do is it acts back up and is monitored by the hypothalamus. And if the levels get too high or too low, it can tweak what's going on here. So again, on almost all these, nice little negative feedback loop where the hormone is acting on a target cell, but also acting up and being monitored by the hypothalamus. I could give you the example with the gonadotropin releasing hormones. Release from here, act on the pituitary, cause it to release the different gonadotropins, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, which act on the testes and ovaries to do different things. They release particular hormones which act on target cells, but also feed back and, again, are going to be regulated. So nice little feedback loops. That shows you a couple other examples where this is a little bit more direct, where we have prolactin and growth hormone, which don't actually work through a second endocrine organ. They are directly on their target cells. But you can see prolactin acts on the mammary glands, but also the levels are monitored by the hypothalamus and can be shut down if levels get too high. Same idea with growth hormone. So what we'll do before I'll kind of end this first show here is I'm going to walk you through the hormones of the pituitary. So the hormones of the pituitary, we'll see in the anterior pituitary for the most part. These are all going to be hormones that, not all of them, but a good chunk of them are going to act on other endocrine glands. So the first one, TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, it's going to act on the thyroid to cause the release of different thyroid hormones. Pretty straightforward on that one. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, it's going to act on the adrenal cortex. So the adrenal cortex makes some different glucocorticoids and things like aldosterone. We'll talk about what those do later on, but the adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to cause the release of hormones from the adrenal cortex. Follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, is going to act on the ovaries in the female to produce egg cells. In males, it's going to act on the testes to produce sperm cells. We'll see that is one of those gonadotropins. The other one is luteinizing hormone, which is going to act on the ovaries, at least after ovulation, to promote the release of progesterone in females. And in males, luteinizing hormone actually stimulates some cells called interstitial cells in the testes to produce testosterone. So again, these hormones are going to act on another endocrine gland in these cases. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is what the hypothalamus is going to release in order to cause the release of FSH and LH. The two hormones of the anterior pituitary that don't act on another endocrine gland are prolactin, which is mainly produced during pregnancy to stimulate the mammary glands to become milk-producing. And then finally, growth hormone, it's what's released kind of throughout your life, but especially during your childhood and puberty in order to stimulate growth of different cells, stimulate cell growth, replication, things like that. There is a middle pituitary hormone called melanocyte stimulating hormone, which not surprisingly stimulates melanocytes to produce melanin, and that's pretty straightforward. The posterior lobe or neurohypophysis, posterior lobe of the pituitary, it is going to make, it stores two different hormones that the hypothalamus has made and then can be triggered to release these through nerve impulse, not actually releasing hormones. So the posterior pituitary, one of the hormones it holds on to and can be triggered to release by the hypothalamus is ADH, or anti-diuretic hormone, and most people are aware that a diuretic is going to make you have to urinate or go to the bathroom more often. Anti-diuretic hormone is something that can get released that is going to trigger your kidneys to reabsorb more water and therefore make you urinate less. It is a big help in regulating blood pressure, as we'll see in AP2. The other one that is triggered by the posterior, that is stored in the posterior pituitary and triggered for release by the hypothalamus is oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that it's definitely involved in kind of pregnancy and post-pregnancy things like lactation. It is also triggered on release during orgasm. It's a lot of times referred to as an attachment hormone as well. A lot of this dumps into the system right after a mom has a child. So it has other things just besides the functions we're saying here, but these are the main ones I'm going to focus on today. So oxytocin, at least in the mammary glands, can stimulate contractile cells, that causes the letdown of the milk during lactation. The other thing that oxytocin does is it's part of that positive feedback loop that we gave an example of early on in AP1, which stimulates the uterus to contract, which causes stretching, which sends a signal up to the brain to release more oxytocin, and you get that positive feedback loop until the baby is delivered. So that is the finish of at least the pituitary hormones. On the next show here, I'm going to run through the rest of the glands, kind of telling you what the gland is, what is the hormone that it makes, and then what are the actions of those hormones. And again, that's really most of what the endocrine system is going to be.